Okay. We started Job 19 last week, and this is Job's response. He's responding directly after who did he speak? Who spoke before? I think it was Eliphaz, but was it Bildad? Might have been Bildad. Um, yeah, it was Bildad. And so Job is responding, and we looked at maybe the first 5 or 6 verses last week. And what I want to do tonight is read through Job 19 again. And I want to remind you of the structure of it before we do that. And then after we read through it, I want to start going through it verse by verse and showing um, how Job prefigures Christ in his suffering here and in what he says. And so basically, the structure, there's 2 parts that I think last week I broke it into 4 parts, but basically, you could do it in 2 big parts. The first part is Job's complaint after his short introduction, where he rebukes his friends. So you have Job's complaint, and in that complaint, he describes what God is doing to him. And there's going to be a lot of occasion to see how that prefigures Christ. And you'll also notice, if you can remember, what Bildad said about Job's situation being the situation of a sinner who is, God is pouring out wrath on the sinner, and the sinner is probably going to go to hell. This was Bildad's assessment. And Job is using descriptions and language that are pretty much the same as what Bildad said. So he's going to be redescribing his situation when he says, God did this to me, and he's going to be using descriptions that Bildad has previously used, and which were echoes of what Job had previously said. So Job is doing that. So his words remind us of what Bildad said was the lot of those under God's curse, and they're also prefigure. They also prefigure Christ. Also, I'm going to point out a couple of places where Job is using descriptions that are later used to describe the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And the significance of that is that Jesus, of course, is the temple. And so its destruction and rebuilding is a prophecy of him and his death and resurrection. So I wanted to just point out that Job is using language that is linked to the temple and its destruction. And then Jesus, of course, said, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up, speaking of himself. So there's a couple of different layers, right, that we'll be looking at tonight. And so I was praying, especially before our meeting, in the prayer I offered, and also before that the Lord would help me to present this in a way that is not confusing, because there are these different kind of levels that are going on here. And so that's basically what I'm going to be doing. So the first section, Job's complaint, we're going to see a lot of things there. The second section would be Job's hope, where he has that really famous passage about, I know that my Redeemer lives. And of course, everybody can see Jesus there. And we'll spend some time talking about that. But I think it's the parts where it's harder to see the Lord, which are really beneficial for us in this study. So let me read Job 19. Then Job answered and said to his friends, how long will you torment me and break me in pieces with words? These 10 times you have cast reproach upon me. Are you not ashamed to wrong me? And even if it be true that I have erred, my error remains with myself. If indeed you magnify yourselves against me and make my disgrace an argument against me, know then that God has put me in the wrong and closed his net about me. Behold, I cry out violence, but I am not answered. I call for help, but there is no justice. He has walled up my way so that I cannot pass, and he has set darkness upon my paths. He has stripped from me my glory and taken the crown from my head. He breaks me down on every side, and I am gone. And my hope he has pulled up like a tree. He has kindled his wrath against me and counts me as his adversary. His troops come on together. They have cast up their siege ramp against me and encamp around my tent. He has put my brothers far from me, and those who knew me are wholly estranged from me. My relatives have failed me. My close friends have forgotten me. The guests in my house and my maidservants count me a stranger. I have become a foreigner in their eyes. I call to my servant, but he gives me no answer. I must plead with him and with my mouth for mercy. My breath is strange to my wife, and I am a stench to the children of my own mother. Even young children despise me. When I rise, they talk against me. All my intimate friends abhor me, and those I loved have turned against me. My bones stick to my skin and to my flesh, and I have escaped by the skin of my teeth. Have mercy on me. Have mercy on me, O you, my friends, for the hand of God has touched me. Why do you, like God, pursue me? Why are you not satisfied with my flesh? That's the first part. That's the complaint. And now he's going to give his hope. Oh, that my words were written. Oh, that they were inscribed in a book. Oh, that with an iron pen and lead they were engraved in the rock forever. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been thus destroyed, yet in my flesh I shall see God, whom I shall see for myself, and my eyes shall behold and not another. My heart faints within me. If you say how we will pursue him, and the root of the matter is found in him, be afraid of the sword, for wrath brings the punishment of the sword, that you may know there is a judgment. The last two lines are directed back to his friends. He's warning them to stop attacking him, to stop pursuing him. He's saying, yes, God is pursuing me, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to do that. We should be compassionate and merciful. And he's warning them of coming judgment. So last week I had mentioned that in verse 6, I believe it is, where Job says, know that God has put me in the wrong. He's making the point there that his situation is brought about by God, and God has not explained this situation to Job and why God is doing it. But his friends should not assume wickedness on Job's part, because God is the one who's arranged this. And of course, you could say that about any circumstance that God arranges, but Job says it in particular about his circumstance because he knows that he didn't do anything that caused God to react or act toward him. God doesn't react, but Job hasn't done anything that would justify, from a human point of view, God's um, actions toward him, which he's going to describe right after he says these words. And the other thing I said was that the words for God has put me in the wrong, put me there means to falsify or to bend or to make crooked what was straight. And basically applied to a situation like this, it means that God has perverted justice. And I mentioned that I believe Job is not stating that God is unjust. He's not making an accusation against God. He's making he's using the language of appearance, much like we would use when we say the sun is rising or something like that. It's not true strictly, but it is what it appears, and that's how it appears, and so that's how we describe it. Job is describing saying this looks really wrong. That's basically what he's saying, but he's saying it in a stronger way than that. And I'm not sure if I mentioned at this point last week, but if you think about the crucifixion, the people at the cross who didn't know Jesus, actually, the people that did know Jesus, the disciples, would have looked at that and said, "There's something really wrong here. This just is just wrong. What is God doing?" They would have said the same type of thing. This looks completely unjust, right? And that's what Job's saying about his situation. My situation looks completely unjust. Yeah. So moving ahead in the outline then, let me catch up. I need to click on the passages so I know what I'm reading. Okay. So Job goes on in verse 6, to read that again. Read 6 again. It says, know that God has put me in the wrong. He's closed his net about me. So God has closed the net around Job, meaning that Job has been trapped. And previously in Job 18, Bildad had argued that Job, one of the wicked, has walked into this trap. And that passage says this, Job 18, 8 through 10. Bildad talking about the wicked, for he is cast into a net by his own feet, and he walks on its mesh. A trap seizes him by the heel, a snare lays hold of him, a rope is hidden for him in the ground, a trap for him in the path. Job says in verse 6 and also verse 8 of chapter 19 that it is God who has put him in this trap. It's God who's captured him. It's not my fault. Job is saying, God did this to me. Verse 6, then, know then that God has put me in the wrong. He's closed his net around me. In verse 8, he has walled up my way so that I cannot pass, and he has set darkness on my paths. Job is saying, not me. I didn't do this. I wasn't wicked. This isn't the recompense of the wicked happening to me because I'm not wicked. Something else is going on here. In verse 7, Job says, behold, I cry out violence, but I am not answered. I call for help, but there is no justice. This is Job hearing silence, getting no response from God. This has been the consistent issue. I mean, the most hurtful and perplexing thing for Job, and probably most frustrating thing, is that whereas before he could just talk to God and he would get a response, he would know what to do, he would feel right with God. Now he's got nothing. And it feels like God has totally just turned around, walked away, and abandoned him. Job is just out there all by himself, and he's shouting to God, and God is not listening, right? I think this is it's reminiscent or prefigures hold on. Sorry. Prefigures Matthew 27, 46 to 50, which I thought I had put in the it's not there. Sorry about that. It's not in the list of passages, but it should be. So we should be looking at Matthew 27, 46 to 50 right now. And then after that, Psalm 22, 1. Matthew 27, 46 to 50. And that says, at about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? And some of the bystanders hearing it said, this man is calling Elijah. And one of them at once ran and took a sponge, filled it with sour wine, and put it on a reed and gave it to him to drink. But others said, wait, let us see whether Elijah will come and save him. And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. So neither Elijah nor God, right? The people are mistaken about Elijah, but nobody answers Jesus. He cries out, and the reason he cries out this cry of dereliction is because he feels like God the Father has abandoned him. This is the same situation that Job is describing when he says, I cry out violence, and all I get is echo of my own voice. There's nobody there. What's going on? So he prefigures Christ and the abandonment by the Father, or the silence of the Father at this point. Psalm 22, 1 is the passage that Jesus is quoting. And my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning? And we'll probably just read the whole thing because it's useful and great. Verse 2, oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I find no rest. This sounds like this could be Job saying these words. Right? Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel, and you, our fathers, trusted. They trusted, and you delivered them. To you they cried and were rescued, and you they trusted and were not put to shame. But I am a worm and not a man, scorned by mankind and despised by the people. All who see me mock me. They make mouths at me. They wag their heads. He trusts in the Lord. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, for he delights in him. As you think through the parallels between Jesus and Job, you'll remember Job complained about being mocked continually by everybody who saw him. Verse 9, yet you are he who took me from the womb. You made me trust you at my mother's breast. Job has said similar things. On you I was cast from my birth, and from my mother's womb you have been my God. Be not far from me, for trouble is near, for there is none to help. Many bulls encompass me, many strong bulls of Bashan surround me. They open wide their mouths at me like a ravening and roaring lion. This is the gaping and the mocking going on. I am poured out like water. All of my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax and is melted within my breast. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to my jaws. You lay me in the dust of death. For dogs encompass me, a company of evildoers encircles me. They have pierced my hands and feet. I can count all my bones. They stare and gloat over me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Now later we're going to read Job say, my bones stick to my skin. This is another way of saying, that I can count my bones. There they are. I can see them. And he's often talked about being surrounded by people who are out to get him, right? The dogs and the evildoers. 19, but you, O Lord, do not be far off. O you, my help, come quickly to my aid. Deliver my soul from the sword, my precious life from the power of the dog. Save me from the mouth of the lion. And Job has used this type of language. He's also actually described God as both a lion and a hunter. And so he's interesting. And then verse 21b, the tone of the psalm changes. You have from crying out in desperation and in pain and in this terrible situation that's being described, changes from that to rejoicing. You have rescued me from the horns of the wild oxen. I'm sure I've mentioned this before. The resurrection is right there between line 1 and line 2 of verse 21. You have the rescue. And then the Lord says, I will tell of your name to my brothers. In the midst of the congregation, I will praise you. You who fear the Lord, praise him. All you offspring of Jacob, glorify him and stand in awe of him, all you offspring of Israel. For he has not despised or abhorred the affliction of the afflicted. He has not hidden his face from him, but has heard when he cried to him. So, ironically, in the Psalm, this is echoed in Hebrews when it says that Jesus, he cried out to the Father, suffered and obeyed, and he cried out to the Father, and because of his obedience, because of his suffering in obedience, he is heard. That's what he says. He's echoing this passage, but you think about the timeline with Jesus. When does the Father hear Jesus? To hear means to respond, right? In the resurrection, Jesus dies. And that's what the writer of the Hebrews is referring to. And that's what's happening here in this passage, right? Verse 24, for he, the Father, has not despised or abhorred the affliction of the afflicted, and has not hidden his face from him, but he has heard when he cried to him. From you comes my praise in the great congregation. My vows I will perform before those who fear him. The afflicted shall eat and be satisfied. Those who seek him shall praise the Lord. May your hearts live forever. All the ends of the earth shall remember and turn to the Lord, and all the families of the nations shall worship before you. For kingship belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nations. All the prosperous of the earth eat and worship. Before him shall bow all who go down to the dust, even the one who could not keep himself alive. Posterity shall serve him. It shall be told of the Lord to the coming generation. They shall come and proclaim his righteousness to a people yet unborn, for he has done it. Um, so there's a picture of general resurrection there. There's, always a debate among smart scholars about, does the Old Testament teach the resurrection? What was the Jewish view of the afterlife? Oh, maybe they didn't have a view of the resurrection. Oh, they were kind of primitive, and we get more light in the New Testament. It's just silly how ignorant the New Testament or biblical scholars in some cases think that the Old Testament church was. Verse 29, all the prosperous of the earth eating worship before him shall bow, all who go down to the dust. Everyone who dies will bow down to him. Not before they die, but after they die, right? Before and after, right? This is a resurrection, a general resurrection that's happening right here. It's one of the probably 20 or 30 passages in the Old Testament where you can see not only the resurrection of Jesus, but the resurrection of all people. So anyway, that wasn't really what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to just go to Psalm 22, and we know it's about Jesus. I wanted to kind of show you how Job is also prefiguring this more than just that one verse or the first two verses about my God, why did you forsake me? But lots of places in this psalm, you have a picture uh, which is given us by Job of some of these things. Um, and Job goes on to say that God has stripped from him his glory in verse 9 and taken the crown from his head. And I think we want to look at Psalm 89:39 for that. So this is a psalm of Ethan the Ezrahite, and he is one of the wise men. It's mentioned in the Bible as a wise man. He is writing about what looks like God's abandonment of his people. He's saying, you've made all these promises to David that you will be their God and you will rescue David and he will have a line that does not end and he will be king over the kingdom and you will be with us. But yet, look, here we are in Babylon and there's no temple and Jerusalem's been destroyed. And you did this, he says. He says 13 times, you did this to us. But he's not accusatory in the way that I just said it. He just says it probably like Job says it. God did this. You did this. You did this. So you must have a plan. What's your plan? This is one of the verses, verse 39, where he talks about you did this. He says to God, you have renounced the covenant with your servant. You have defiled his crown in the dust. I went to this verse because Job mentions that God has taken the crown from his head. And of course, in Job's situation, what that means, what that looks like is prior to, the second half of chapter 1, prior to that, Job looked, he was basically a king. He's the richest man in all that part of the world. He's very powerful. He's got a big household and lots of sheep and ox and all kinds of. He's got wonderful children. They each got a house on his property. He's got his own domain there, and he looks like. I mean that's spoken of as glory. The outward manifestation of the goodness of God or the strength of power, right? So Job had all that. He looked like someone who had everything, and then God took it all away. And so he says, you stripped me of my glory, and you've taken the crown from my head. That language is used for the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, and that's what Psalm 89 there is doing about you defiled his crown in the dust, not just David's crown, but everything that signifies, right? All of the promises to David. That's why he starts with you've renounced the covenant, all of the promises to David and all of that. And so I have this kind of a picture of taking the crown off the head. And the psalmist goes a bit further, and you've thrown it into the dust, in the place of the dead. You tossed it down there. Um, we have the same thing, of course, with Jesus, right? But it wasn't God stripping him. It was a voluntary action on the part of our Savior. And you read about that in Philippians 2, 5 through 11. Paul writes to the Philippians, have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but he emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. So verse 7, by emptying himself, this is the uh, not the removal intrinsically from his nature of the things that he has by right as a divine person. He can't do that, right? He can't stop being God, but he voluntarily uh, takes upon himself human nature and lives through that nature, so that he is not that it's a mystery, right? I can't explain it exactly perfectly so that you can't poke a hole in it, but basically the thought is that he doesn't access omniscience. He knows only what the Father tells him. He doesn't access almighty power. He does only what the Father tells him to do and empowers him to do by the Spirit. He lives as a man. And so that's what the empty. So somebody said, I think it was Charles Hodge, but maybe Mike B knows, but somebody said Jesus doesn't, the incarnation is not an act of subtraction. We read this passage and we think it's subtraction. He emptied himself. It's an act of addition. He takes upon himself human nature, and then he lives through that nature voluntarily. And so he himself, to use Job's word, strips himself of the glory and takes the crown off his head. He takes the crown off his head, and he comes down to be human and to live among us. And then he will receive that crown back with even greater authority later. And we'll go on and read the rest of the Philippians passage. And being, verse 8, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Yeah, that's the part of the verse we love that, right? We love that. And the whole passage is beautiful, but we like the upswing, the arc where it goes up, and he is given the name above all names, given the glory above all glories, and the authority over all things. But he lays aside, he strips himself, takes off in the metaphor, he takes off all of the trappings of divinity and becomes a man, all of his kingship, all of those attributes. He puts the exercise of those attributes on hold. And so this picture with Job, I've been stripped of everything, all my glory, all my crowns, everything that made me me is pictured in Jesus. Job is stripped and humbled. Jesus strips and is humbled. And beautiful, beautiful passage. Last week, Mike B, you mentioned Psalm 8, 5 and 6, I think you were probably referring to, or you just referred to it as Psalm 8, but I think it was in the connection with this or some related thought where Psalm 8, 5, and 6, the psalmist writes about mankind, and then he's also writing about Jesus. The New Testament authors take this to be about Jesus. He writes, yet you, God, you have made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor. You have given him dominion over the works of your hands. You put all things under his feet. This is both about Adam and about Christ. Adam is a picture of Christ. And God makes Adam a little lower than the angels, but yet he crowns him with glory and honor and gives him dominion. And these are two things. It's not just in the act of creating Adam that Adam receives dominion, but Adam is given dominion by God at a point after his creation. right? He says to him, he creates him like pretty early in Genesis 1. Toward the end of Genesis 1, he says to him, have dominion. And so there are two actions. Christ is made lower than angels, not created lower, but he is put lower than angels. God put him there, to use Job's language. Um, Christ is made lower than the angels, and then in his resurrection, he's given dominion over all the works of God's hands, and all things are placed under his feet. And again, the writer to the Hebrews brings this out really well. So this is related, I think, to the stripping of glory. It's the creation of Adam shows the pattern. What should it be like? Um, but what happens to Job is the opposite of this, right? Job doesn't go from humility to glory. He goes from glory to humility. And that's what happens with Jesus. And then because of Jesus humbling himself, as the Philippians 2 passage, then he also receives dominion. So there's the U-shaped um, humility, glory. Jesus starts from glory, humility to glory. Um, so anyway, I included it in my outline, the Psalm 8 passage, because I thought it was a good passage that you mentioned, Mike, and I wanted to know if you or anyone else has anything you want to comment on at this point, either about this passage or anything else.
Yes, I have a question, please.
Yes, Catherine.
Verse 6. I need
Yes.
clarity, please, about the word put.
Yeah.
What you read says, put me in the wrong, and you put some emphasis on what that put is an indicator of. And my question is, mine says, know then that God has wronged me and has closed his net around me. Because my translation has not put in there, does that change anyway what one says against the other? Does that make sense, my question?
Yeah, it does make sense.
Okay.
So to read the New American Standard again, know then that God has wronged me. That's what yours says, right? Know then that God has wronged me and has surrounded me with his net. I think that's the
Yes,
New American
closed his
Standard.
net around me, right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think that the part we're looking at here with the put me in the wrong is the first line, know that God has wronged me. And I think that what's happening in the New American Standard is they're just stating it forcefully. Know then that God has wronged me. Conveys basically the same thought as God has put me in the wrong. It's God who's done this. They're not translating the word put, but you could say it might be inferred or included in the way that they've written it. Either way, whether you put the word put there or not, if you do what the New American Standard has done, still conveys the idea that there's some miscarriage of what is right going on here, and I think they had that in mind, when they write it. So I don't think I can see it materially that they're different, but substantially, I think they're saying the same thing.
I agree with that. I thought that it does. And I thought initially when I read it in the NAS that it sounded stronger than what you read with put me in the wrong. It's like,
right.
You just put him in the wrong. It didn't have the force in it that it sounded like it did in the NAS, but it does. I understand the meaning now. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Good question. Nice. It's always nice to have questions and input and to see what the other translations are saying too. That's also very helpful. I think to me it is, at least.
It definitely is to me. You know that. You know that, don't you?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, anybody else have anything you want to say at this point? And you don't have to wait for me to ask. You can just interrupt anytime too. All right.
I guess just one quick thing about you mentioned how Hebrews uses this and about how like we see Christ in the Old Testament, and some people think that it's they don't take full advantage of that, I guess you could say. So the one interesting thing that the in Hebrews is it makes the point of, this psalm appears to be like from from 4 through 8 appears to be talking about humans, like God created man for these purposes, right? And then
Right.
it states that man, Adam was given dominion over the works, and you have put all things under his feet. And um,
You're
so,
in Hebrews. You're in Hebrews 2, right? Is that where you're looking?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
like the point, I guess being made there is that but we don't now if you look at like mankind or after Adam, like we don't see all things under mankind's feet. Like mankind obviously is not sovereign and ruling and properly ordering the world. Like things have gone wrong. So the Hebrews points out that that's how we know this is talking about Christ.
Hmm. Yeah. So the Hebrews passage, we can all look at that. It's Hebrews 2, 5, and following. Hebrews 2, 5 and following. Um, so I'm going to read it in the New American Standard since Catherine has that. And if you've got, I'm particularly interested in the pronouns in verse 8 when we get there. Um, Verse 5, for he, that is God the Father, did not subject to angels the world to come, about which we are speaking. But someone has testified somewhere, saying, and both Mike and I always laugh when we read that because it's like the writer of the Hebrews didn't know where this came from, but he obviously did, right?
Mhm.
Um, but someone has testified somewhere saying, what is man that you think of him, or a son of man that you are concerned about him? You have made him for a little while lower than angels. You have crowned him with glory and honor. You have put everything in subjection under his feet. That's the quotation from Psalm 8. For in subjecting all things to him, he left nothing that is not subject to him. But now we do not yet see all things subjected to him. So the New American Standard has him here in both the quotation from Psalm 8, what is man that you think of him, etc. Every pronoun there is other than you is going to be him. And it could be a collective noun, a singular uh, collective pronoun. Uh, but then it could be the same thing in verse 8, could be singular, collective. I'm not saying that from a grammatical point of view, like I researched that. I'm just saying that I know people interpret this differently. The NIV, for instance, quoting Psalm 8 uh, here in Hebrews 2:6, what is mankind that you are mindful of them, the Son of Man that you care for him? You made them a little lower than the angels. You crowned them with glory and honor, put everything under their
Mm.
feet. Verse 8 to continue. In putting everything under them, God left nothing that is not subject to them. Yet at present we do not see everything subject to them. But we do see Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
who was made lower than the angels for a little while, now crowned with glory and honor because he suffered death. So anyway, they are taking the hymn. They've got a little note there in actually they don't do they? Oh, do they? What does their note say? Right. They have a note at the end of the quotation from Psalm 8 that you could also translate this. You have made him a little lower than the angels, etc., crowned him, etc. Right. So they recognize that. And then in verse 8 in the text of Hebrews, and putting everything under them, they have a note or him. So they're doing a translation. They're making a judgment, right, in their translation. The standard way to translate it is the way the New American Standard does, as a singular, and and I'll just, to be being gracious, I'll say probably you might be able to interpret that as a collective singular. So them, but but I don't interpret it that way. I think that when I'm reading, especially the Hebrews version, the Hebrews part of verse 8, for in subjecting all things to him, he's not talking about Adam. He's he's moved over and he's now talking about Christ. But it's probably not a significant difference. I think everybody comes out at the right place at the end, right? Interpreting it. But my way of reading it is that the psalmist is talking about Christ and Adam is just the picture. Uh, and that's the way the writer of the Hebrews is using the psalm. But like I said, there are a couple of different ways people take it. I think Mike's way was somewhat slightly different than what I said, but not as, I don't think Mike is on the NIV side. I think you're probably more on the collective noun side.
About
About the hymn
the
in,
hymn, yeah.
yeah, in verse, like in the Hebrews quote, in the quote from Psalm 8.
I don't know, I guess what's the distinction whether the hymn in the psalm is talking about Christ?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm saying, I guess my reading would be Christ is the primary.
Yeah.
The psalm is written for the purpose of instructing God's people in Christ, in the Messiah.
Yeah.
But the psalm is using Adam and the creation as the background for that instruction.
Hmm.
So say it like that. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so
however you want to grammatically like justify it, I agree with what you're saying is that Christ is the primary uh object of this psalm.
right, exactly. And I think we both agree that when the psalm was penned, Christ is still the primary at
Right.
that point
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's not like new meaning added or anything like that in the New Testament. It's just pointing out was what was already there. And the way that he says it, he's not like saying, "Oh, I know you've always thought this was about something else, but let me tell you what it's really about." He's like presenting it like, "You already know this." You know? So
Yeah.
yeah. So anyway, thank you uh, for indulging me on that. Um, so Job 19:10. Moving on to the next verse. Job says, "He breaks me down on every side. I am gone, and my hope he has pulled up like a tree." I just want to make the observ observation that Job's hope, um, he's saying, "My hope has been pulled up like a tree." Basically, I have no hope, right? But he has hope, and we've seen it in multiple chapters where he has these sections of hope. And even in this chapter, he's going to have a stirring and beautiful expression of hope. And so I think the way that we want to understand that is that Job has no hope in being vindicated in this life. He thinks he's just going to die in this condition, and then God is going to make it right. And I think we can see that in Job 14, earlier speech of Job 14, 13 to 17. This is what he's hoping for. "Oh, that you would hide me in Sheol." So he's talking about, I'm dead. You know, "Oh, that you would hide me in Sheol, that you would conceal me until your wrath be past, that you would appoint me a set time and remember me. If a man dies, shall he live again? All the days of my service I would wait till my renewal should come. You would call and I would answer you. You would long for the work of your hands, for then you would number my steps. You would not keep watch over my sin. My transgression would be sealed up in a bag, and you would cover over my iniquity." Job says, "I'm going to go to the grave. I'm a sinner just like everyone else. I didn't sin and cause this, but I'm still going to die. And my hope is that one day you will not be angry at me anymore, and you will have taken care of my sin, sealed up my transgression in a bag, covered over my iniquity. It's been atoned for." That's the thought there. It's been atoned for. and then you will call me from the grave, and everything will be all right. So he doesn't have hope that when he says God's dashed my hope, he doesn't mean in all areas. He's talking about uh, I've been wanting God to explain this to me and make this right, but he's not listening and he won't respond. I don't think he's going to respond. Something's going on. I'm going to die, but then he'll fix it because I know God will. God will do that. So he's saying my hope in God's eventual working this out is not gone, but my hope in it happening quickly is so his faith is very much there, like Abraham's faith, right? Where Abraham said, was told to kill his son, and the writer of the Hebrews says, Abraham believed that God could raise the dead. He's like, well, we're not going to get out of this problem right here in this life, but God will take care of it. God will raise the dead. This is Job's faith as well. Moving to verse 11. Verse 11 says that he has kindled his wrath against me and counts me as his adversary. To kindle wrath is to just keep nursing it. It's like to keep stoking the fire, right? To keep not just light, but uh, work with. So Job is feeling like God is just, incensed and not backing down. And so that's what's going on. Now, the next thing he says in 11 is that God counts me as his adversary. So we've said this before. God is treating Job like an enemy. He's treating Job like a sinner. This really interesting use of language, though. Job says he counts me as his adversary. This is a really important theological word, right? This is extremely important. This is about imputation or credit. Abraham believed the Lord and it was counted to him or credited to him as righteousness. Abraham was not righteous, but he was counted by God as righteous. He was credited by God as being righteous. Job is saying, I'm not God's enemy, but he's counting me his enemy. He is treating me as his enemy. He is crediting to me sin that needs to be punished in such a way. It's talking about imputation, right? And extremely important theological teaching and concept. So Jesus, he's counted, Jesus, who is called the righteous one in more than one place in the Bible, is counted a sinner by God. And he's counted a sinner so that we sinners would be counted righteous in him. So there's a double imputation there. Luther said this is, the great exchange, right? We give him our sin. He gives us his righteousness. What a great deal. I mean, it's like, wow, what a fantastic deal is that? It can't be any better than that, right? I mean, that's fantastic. Right. So it's, oh man, did I really mess up stuff? I'm trying to do the, wow. Sorry, all of my links that say passages, somehow they all got messed up. Sorry about that. So I want to look at 1 John 2:1, followed by Isaiah 53:12, followed by 2 Corinthians 5:21. That's what happened. I worked too hard on this and now it got messed up. So the first one was 1 John 2:1. Jesus is the righteous one. And NIV, my dear children, I write this to you so that you will not sin. But if anyone does sin, we have an advocate an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous one. Jesus is the righteous one. God's going to count him a sinner. We see that in Isaiah 53:12. NIV again. Actually, yeah, we can read NIV. Therefore, I will give him a portion among the great. He will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death, and he was numbered. ESV has counted with the transgressors. For he bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors. This text is saying, and it has said in another place in Isaiah 53, but it's reiterating the suffering servant here, Jesus. He's not a transgressor. He was just counted as one. He was lined up by God with the transgressors and counted among them, but he wasn't a transgressor himself. That's the import of that language there. That imputation is happening. He's imputed transgression, counted among them. 2 Corinthians 5:21, he made him, God the Father made him, Jesus. He made him who knew no sin to be sin in our behalf, so that we might become the righteousness of God in him. There's the great exchange right there. So when Job uses this language, God has counted me his enemy. He's using this language of imputation, of exchanging places, he's using this. Job is counted a sinner. Well, who else and treated as a sinner? Who does that picture? Not me. I am a sinner. That pictures Jesus, right? That's very, very clear. We've got 6 minutes left. So we're going to look at Job 19, verse 12. His troops come together and build their way against me and camp around my tent. That's the New American Standard there. God is marshaling everything that he has against Job. That's what Job is saying there. God has put all of his wrath, all of his attention on Job. And this is, he's just mustering the army. Job's one man who's been broken down, and God is sending troops, not just, a couple of guys, a couple of assassins, but he's sending, a big army against Job coming from different directions. It's an overwhelming amount of attack there. In the next several verses, Job talks about his acquaintances. Would be verses 13 through 19. I'll read those again. He has put my brothers far from me, and those who knew me are wholly estranged from me. My relatives have failed me. My close friends have forgotten me. The guests in my house and my maidservants count me a stranger. I have become a foreigner in their eyes. I call to my servant, but he gives me no answer. I must plead with him with my mouth for mercy. My breath is strange to my wife. I'm a stench to the children of my own mother. Even young children despise me. When I rise, they talk against me. All my intimate friends abhor me, and those whom I love have turned against me. So the relationships he mentions are brothers, acquaintances, relatives, close friends, house guests, maidservants, personal servant, wife, brothers and sisters, young children, intimate friends, and loved ones. So it's pretty much everybody. Mm-hmm. And these have all been disrupted, hindered, destroyed by God. He says, those who were once close to him have been removed far from him. They're now wholly estranged. They've failed and forgotten him. They count him as a stranger and a foreigner. They do not answer him. They ignore him or treat him as if he were not there. They treat him unmercifully. Job must plead earnestly to them for any mercy or consideration. Job is treated and considered by them to be a stranger. His very presence is repulsive. He is despised. When he appears, everybody speaks maliciously against him. So in other words, those closest to him, those who he loved the most and held dear, every one of them abhors him and has turned against him. I think you can see how that would be true of Jesus as well. Some of the passages, there's three passages. Luke 24 or 23:49, Luke 23:49. And then after that, Psalm 38:11 and Matthew 18:17. There's a couple more also that I'll mention in a minute. So about Jesus, all those who knew him, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance watching these things. So it's the at a distance part, which is telling there. They haven't broken off all relationship to him, but they are trying to keep it hidden, right? They're at a distance there. Psalm 38:11 says, "My friends and companions avoid me because of my wounds. My neighbors stay far away." And this is going to be about Jesus again. Maybe next week we'll have more time. Maybe we'll return to that and read it. Matthew 18:17. This is how you treat somebody who has sinned and won't repent. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, he is to be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. I read that because they're treating Job as a foreigner, stranger, somebody dangerous, not to be paid attention to, avoid contact with him, which is not exactly the way that you're supposed to interpret Matthew 18, but Matthew 18 is treat him like a tax collector and a sinner, or a tax collector is to treat him as somebody who needs evangelism. You pray for their soul, and you treat them like an unbeliever in the sense that you don't look down on them and you don't avoid them, but you give them the gospel and you pray for them and try to help them with Christian love, but you don't treat them like a member of the family. That's different. So Job has been kicked out of the family, basically. He's not being treated like a member of the family. I think there's too many passages to finish. I have like 6 or 7 more passages I wanted to look at here. I think we'll finish those next week. Anybody? So, I've been trying to work through Job's complaint at this point and show you how it crosses over and tells us something about our Savior. Anybody have any response to any of that? Any thoughts about it? First of all, does it look like it's there? I see a nod.
Yes.
Okay.
It's striking.
Yeah. And I think if I had spent more time in the passage, I would see more. Because every time I come back to the passage and look at it, I see more. So, even though we're moving rather slowly, it is also, in one sense, quickly, because there is more probably there.
Yeah, I'm looking at that word that you pointed out of the imputation counted.
Yeah.
Where am I here?
Verse 11.
Verse 11, yeah.
Yeah.
He counts me as his adversary. It's also echoed a little later down about somebody else, one of his relatives counts him.
All right. As a foreigner.
Counts as a foreigner. Yeah, same word, but I was just looking at the Strong's, and so it's a really interesting word, and I think it does help to recognize what's going on there. So, like when used positively, it's like we're talking about imputation, but it's used a lot negatively about when you look in Psalms and Proverbs about the wicked devising schemes.
Yeah.
It's the word they're using for devising.
Mm.
And then the literal meaning is like to weave and fabricate. So, but then Some of the other Old Testament usages of it. You mentioned Abraham. So when Abraham's faith was reckoned to him as righteousness, that's the same word.
Hmm.
Um, and this was a really interesting one of in Genesis 50 when Joseph is telling his brothers not, don't worry about it. God, you you meant it for evil, and God meant it for good. Both of those are using that same word.
Hmm.
So that one's really interesting because it almost that sort of encapsulates a little bit of the double meaning that we're getting out of Job, is that he's making it sound like God is scheming against, in a way, if you read it, it sounds
Hmm.
like he's saying, God, you're scheming against me and you're destroying me, and right.
Yeah.
Um, and that's and then but you see this dynamic in Genesis 50 of what God is, and it's the same word being used about, what you guys schemed against me, God meant for good. And there is using the same word to say both of those things.
Mm. Oh, that's interesting. No, thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah.
So that's Genesis 50:20, right? Is
Yeah.
that right? 20. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I love that passage. It's also, obviously the sovereignty is very dear to me, God's sovereignty, and
Mm.
that passage speaks of it, right? Also is also answers or addresses the question that most people are interested in: how is God's sovereignty and human free will?
Mm.
Um, that addresses it. Everybody did what they wanted. God's will prevail.
Mm.
um, yeah. All right. Well, I'm gonna turn off the recording.